Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's school committee meeting. Matt, could you lead us in the pledge of allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a consent agenda, the minutes from December 5th, 2019, and the oath to bills and payroll.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. We have two sections in the meeting for input from interested citizens, one now and one towards the end of the meeting. Are there any citizens who have any business before the school committee who are not already on the agenda? All right, seeing none. So we have no student representatives to report. I know that there's an event at the high school tonight, so we'll leave that at that. Any other recognition, Dr. Clunchy?
We were fortunate to have another high school music concert, or winter concert more correctly. Very impressive. More than 13 different numbers were played throughout the evening, and it's always nice to see the progress that our students make from grade 5 to their high school experience.
Great. Busy time of year, but
It is.
really good stuff going on. All right, we'll move right into presentations. We have one on a potential recycling initiative program.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Margaret Gibbs, and I've been a resident of this town for 23 years. And I recently became interested in Terracycle through a program that was with CVS and Terracycle and Starlight Foundation. And they were doing something to recycle toothbrushes, toothpaste, that kind of thing. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. And so when I started looking into it, I found out that they did more. So I'm just going to talk to you briefly about what Terracycle is and what the Toms of Maine Brigade is, and then go into some other opportunities. So Terracycle is this company that wants to eliminate the idea of waste. They want to make your waste into a resource instead. And they work with other companies, large and small, who sponsor the recycling efforts. So what these people do is they work together with Terracycle and also with companies that recycle so that they can look at a stream of waste and say, well, how can we recycle toothpaste tubes? What's the best way of doing it? How much is it going to cost? How much can we contribute to it? How many people do we think that we can have a brigade for? They call it a brigade of people contributing towards that waste stream. Then when they do just like a recycling company would do, they clean the things, they pelletize them, and they create things such as park benches, children's playgrounds, waste receptacles, pallets, that kind of thing. So the Toms of Maine Brigade, that is sponsored by the company Toms of Maine, who is, I believe, also owned by Colgate. They will accept any brand of empty oral care products, not just Toms of Maine. Empty deodorant containers as well, and toothbrushes. So again, any brand. They pay me for shipping. They give me a prepaid label so I can ship things to them, and then I can get points for the items that are sent in. Those points can directly translate into dollars for nonprofits such as the schools. And again, they recycle these. They don't throw them into a landfill. So that's really cool, I think. So do I have any questions at this point as to what a brigade is, or have you already heard of Terracycle, maybe? Okay, great. So they have more recycling brigades besides just Toms of Maine. They have one called RB, which stands for Reckitt Benckiser. I don't know how to pronounce that. That's the name of the company. And they can do personal care products, skin care, lip, ear, eye, foot, any of the packaging that these items come in. The tubes that are squeezing, you can't throw those into your recycling bin. At least I can't. They also do the vitamins, minerals, supplements packaging, including blister packs, which I thought was like, who would ever think of recycling a blister pack? Not me. And then Febreze is the sponsor for the air freshener cartridges and plugs, and the packaging that comes in, including the flexible film packaging on it, and the trigger heads, which I don't think that we can do in Littleton, the trigger heads. And then I asked them, well, is that any trigger head, like for a product that you do cleaning with? And they said yes. It doesn't have to be just air freshener trigger heads, but also any cleaning product. So, so they have a really good response time also. When I ask them a question, I usually get back an answer within a week, or usually less. And all of those were not brand specific, but these next ones are brand specific. So they also have something called a Tide Eco Box. And the first time I heard of this was just like a month ago. Does anybody else know what a Tide Eco Box is? I can explain it to you. Apparently, people are concerned, especially Amazon. They'll send people cleaning products, and Tide, if you put the whole Tide container in a box, it's a lot of waste. So they said, okay, well, let's work with Tide about how we can just put this in a cardboard box, and then we have a flexible film packaging inside that, which keeps the liquid contained. And then they still have the little spout and pump. So you can take that box and you can recycle it with your normal cardboard stream. But the inside, that's all plastic. They will take that plastic and recycle it. I just heard about these Swiffer refills. That's something new that they're starting to recycle through Terracycle. And I'm not so sure about that, but because that's going to be lots of dirt on things. And I thought, well, if people can put those into plastic bags or something, if I have too many plastic bags, I can take those, like rinse them out, wash them up, and put them into the recycling at Donnellan's. They'll let you do that there. And then pet food bags and pouches. There's 9 different brands that are represented on Terracycle, and those are all listed there. I do already have the pet food bags being collected at the Loyal Companion, which is in Acton, not the one in Littleton, though. So, let's see. So I've already spoken with Superintendent Bunchy and Dave Riley, and they thought it would be a good idea for me to bring this in front of the school committee to get your approval to start this in the schools. The green team at the high school said that they would be very happy to help make boxes and coordinate. And I just heard that Valerie Finnerty is doing something similar already in the middle school. I can ask her if she wouldn't mind expanding what she's doing. I think she's just doing the Toms of Maine right now. Plus, I believe she's got another collection of markers that she can do outside of Terracycle. There's a different crate. Do you know which one that is, Dr. Clunchy?
No, I don't. No.
Okay.
Crayola does have a program for markers. Crayola does.
Crayola?
Crayola.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's really what I have beyond that, just some example containers of the yellow one in the left-hand corner is the one that's at the transfer station. I've had that there since September. And I was only collecting the Toms of Maine at that point, but they recently told me I can start collecting the other items as well. So I'm going to start that. I've got a website that I'm building for that so that people can see everything before they even come, or maybe they sort of look at it and say, what is that, but they don't want to hang around. They can look at it on a website, and I'll put the website on the container so they can see that. The one in the middle there is in Westford at their town library. They have had in Westford this recycling stream through Terracycle for almost 10 years now, which is incredible, I think, that I had never heard of it. The one that is green there at the bottom is a container that is in a break room at a library in Chicago. And the one at the top right is one that my 4-H kids made. And that's more like the one that we were thinking would be in the schools. Any questions?
Would you have to have different boxes for each brigade, or are they going to put everything in there?
No,
separated?
I thought that it would be easier on everyone, except me, maybe, if they just had one box for everything.
Oh, okay. And anytime, we can increase recycling and make the kids more aware of being environmentally conscious, I think it's a good thing. My only question is, a lot of the products that we're looking to recycle are not things that they would have with them, like in school, taking it for lunch or anything. So they would probably have to take the initiative to grab products from home and bring it in, is what the expectation would be.
Correct. The items that Westford takes, a lot of them are what is related to food. Actually, those brigades are pretty much closed. They don't take any new people. So I could not even sign up for them.
Like
I think the
snacks.
only one I could sign up for was baby food, which is also not something that you expect them to have at the schools.
Dave?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, we became a Green Ribbon School in 2016 from the U.S. Department of Education, and Pier 1 is reducing our environmental impact, so this would go along really well with us being a Green Ribbon School.
Any other questions or thoughts from the school committee?
No, conceptually, for this, I don't see a concern from that perspective. It just struck me is most of these are products that typically aren't in the school, so they'd have to bring them in, which is maybe a little awkward in terms of that part of it. And then I have just concerns based on the variety of products there. Some of them may or may not have odors and other pieces there. I'm sure that we have a proper procedure in place so that it doesn't become an issue within the schools, particularly for people that may have allergies to various sprays and other things, skin sensitivities there. So there's some logistical issues, I think, associated with this, but I think the administration, can
I
work that
agree.
out.
It's not like we don't handle waste and we don't recycle. We do. We have we're probably, from the town perspective, the biggest consumer of those services, just because we may have a big footprint in terms of population and building space and things like that. So I think that's a great point. You guys have had a talk. How are we feeling about it in terms of actual practical implementation and making sure that we don't negatively impact, the buildings or the population during the day?
And we look at this as something we're going to try and see if it's successful, and it'll take some time. I do understand that, is it correct that the library has jumped on board at this time as well?
Yes.
So having another site within the community will help promote what we're doing at the school level. When we looked at it, we just thought, we are a Green Ribbon School District, and this is one more way of increasing our awareness of what can be recycled out there. So I think it's worth giving it a try and seeing what happens.
Yeah, I think it's really good because we keep getting notifications from our recycling company that says, oh, and you can't recycle these little caps or this thing. So having another place would be great. And I was wondering about markers too. Is that I feel like that would be a big thing. All the kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they ask for markers, and I'm sure they forget caps, and, you know, it'd be great to have the Crayola box in the school.
That's something maybe Margaret could look
Yeah.
into as well. The one that really,
I think it has to come, that one has to
Yeah.
come from the school.
That's-
I've looked on their site
Yes.
and
well,
it's
perhaps
really a
Dave
school thing.
can look into that
Yeah.
for us. One that I was hoping would be on stream is the recycling of batteries. I think that's an
Mhm.
issue in most communities. And it'd be really nice to have an opportunity for our community to drop old batteries off, because you really shouldn't be disposing of them in the regular garbage, and yet there's really very hard to find a place that will take used batteries at this point in time. And if I remember our conversation correctly, that our waste station really wasn't interested in upping that.
That's correct. Our transfer station told me that they have to pay for all of the batteries that go out. And so they were not interested in having more come there. But I think I told you that, or I told Dave that maybe if the town and the schools talk together, they might be able to come to some arrangement. There's also, I've found places online that will do battery recycling. You have to pay for the box that then you'd fill and send in to them. So that's another way of doing it. But there's no free place that I could find, not like Terracycle.
Do the hazardous waste days take batteries?
I guess it depends on the battery. Devens, I looked at Devens and they said that regular alkaline batteries are not hazardous waste and they should be disposed of in the trash. But they'll take other types of batteries,
Larger.
the lithium ion.
or the little ones.
Oh, those, yeah.
Well, thank you. It sounds like, I think the right thing to do is just keep working with the administration in terms of execution, but I think there's a clear consensus from the school committee that we're totally supportive of it, obviously with making sure that we don't negatively impact the operations during the day and, student safety, but I don't think that's a huge concern, but just one that we would entrust the administration to keep an eye on. But thank you very much. And we'd like to see also, after we've been down the road with it, come back and let's see how we're doing and maybe brainstorm. If we're doing well, great, but maybe we could talk about how to do even better. Or if we're struggling, we can talk about how to try to, move it forward again. So
Great.
let's start, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, next presentation, big one, 2019 Mcats report.
Yes, tonight is a date evening, as you can see from the package. The principals and curriculum director will be going through our 2019 MCAS results. We have some preliminary data on our vocal survey. I'm sure you remember that from last year. It's a climate measuring survey, so we'll be going through that as well. Just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that this is preliminary data. It hasn't been finalized yet, but it's December, and we thought it would be a good time to put it in this presentation.
Before we start administering them in the spring.
That's right, very true. You're all familiar with the map testing that we do. It's an adaptive exam or test. It helps our teachers witness learning in the various subjects that are tested throughout the year. So it's there are immediate results to the test. Very different than our MCAS testing, where by the time we get the results, our students are in a different grade already. So this can be used during the year. It's been very, very helpful in helping students master curriculum and identifying students that perhaps are struggling with some concepts, and also identifying students that master material very quickly. So we've done this for a number of years. We're still very pleased with the results that we see from using this program. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to our interim curriculum director.
Thank you. And no pressure by Chairman Fontanella saying the big one. So we'll start with the MCAS. So this evening's presentation We're going to start with speaking about the transition to the next generation MCAS, which that eventually we'll be able to take away from this presentation because we're almost all the way there to the next gen, but not quite. We'll then move on to discuss the 2019 MCAS results, state and district, and then we'll have a representative from each of our schools that do MCAS to discuss a little bit more in detail the results that each of those schools found.
So I have to joke about your graphic. Are you implying that the data goes into a black hole and we never see it again?
We're off to a
Well,
good start.
That's awesome.
You made it there. I mean, I also think it shows that there's so much data,
Just
right?
take you off
Get
your,
sucked into the black
your game there.
Sometimes we can get sucked in. And so we're going to try and be careful not to get too far sucked into that black hole of data this evening. Thank you for pointing that out right at the beginning of our presentation. So the transition to next gen MCAS. We're almost there, as I mentioned. So the spring of 2019, all tests in grades 3 through 8, as well as the ELA and math tests for grade 10, were computer-based. And so this was the first administration in spring of 2019 of the next gen MCAS for grade 10 ELA and grade 10 math. And those two exams were based on the Massachusetts 2017 revised curriculum frameworks for ELA and math. Both of those were updated and revised in 2017, and so they pulled from those standards. And the ELA and math MCAS for 2019 was also aligned to the National Assessment of Educational Progress and evidence-based definitions of college and career readiness. And so with this information, then the only exam at this point not to be computer-based is the high school science. And so that is actually going to be taking place this upcoming spring 2020, where there are going to be the high school biology and introductory physics field tests happening. And that will finish out our update or transition, to the next gen MCAS. So just as a little reminder of when we talk about next gen versus legacy, again, there won't be as many references to legacy because we're almost all the way there. But for both of them, we have 4 categories, broken down to 4 categories. Legacy, we were talking about advanced, proficient, needs improvement, warning, failing. And in the next gen MCAS, we're talking about exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, partially meeting expectations, and not meeting expectations. And we'll see tonight that because of the new standards and being a bit of a more rigorous test along with the more rigorous standards, that actually reaching the meeting expectations and exceeding expectations is more difficult on the next gen MCAS than it was on the legacy exam. And so if we look for the 3 to 8 next gen, this is our scaled score range. So previously it was 200 to 280. Now we're looking at a 440 to 560 scale. And so it's a matter of all of us getting used to these new numbers that have drastically changed what we're looking at for the scale. This is the same scale for all assessments in grades 3 through 8 for the next gen. It looks different at the high school level. And so previously for legacy, right, it was 220 and above for ELA and math to be passing the legacy exam in ELA, math, and science. Now for next gen, passing is a 455 in ELA and a 469 in math. And we, at this point, do not know what it will be in science because it is yet to be taken and assessed. And so we see the difference here, and you're going to see that a little bit more when Keith speaks to the high school scores as to how the scales are different and a little bit more detail of how that impacts our students. So if we jump into some 2019 results of state versus the district, looking first at our ELA, on the left you see the by grade at the state level, and on the right you see the 2019 ELA by grade level within Littleton. And so looking at these two charts, we can see that all of our grade levels were at least 8 points higher than the state in meeting expectations or above for every grade level. And so that range of difference went from on the low end of a positive 8 percentage points to a positive 25 percentage points. So we made gains across all of our grade levels in ELA. Looking at the mathematics, again, same setup. We have the state results on the left, and on the right we have our Littleton results. Again, we see increase, or comparatively to the state, we are at higher levels for every single grade level. The difference for the math, the range of difference is a positive 3% all the way to a positive 25% over the state comparatively. Lastly, for the science and technology engineering, again, this looks a little bit different, and this is just the next gen, so we're only looking at grades 5 through 8 on this slide. You can see, again, that our students are above the state level when it comes to the next gen grades 5 to 8. So the state level, grade 5, there's 48% of students that are meeting or exceeding expectations. And for Littleton, we have 58% meeting or exceeding for grade 5 science. In grade 8 at the state level, it's 46%. And grade 8 in Littleton, it's 73%. So again, our overall percentage scores and our average scaled scores are higher than the state level. When we look specifically at grade 10, which is the legacy, so going back because they're not yet the next gen test, we see again that Littleton has outperformed the state with regards to where we were at with our score results. Here we see similar results with regards to LPS versus the state. So we can see this is ELA, going back to that. On average, grades 3 through 8, we had 67% of students meeting or exceeding, whereas the state had 52%. And you can see the scaled score there. We had a difference. We had a positive difference of 7 points versus the state. And in grade 10, 84% was the average of students meeting. We had 84% of students meeting or exceeding expectations versus 61 at the state level. And again, a positive difference of 10.7 points on the scaled score. With regards to math, we see similar results in the sense that LPS was at 62% for grades 3 through 8, whereas the state was at 49%, and we had increased looking at the scaled score of 6.6 points. And then for grade 10, LPS was at 83%, state was at 59%, with a scaled score difference a positive for LPS at 11.6. With regards to science, again, we have a little bit more information here because we have the next gen versus the legacy happening. So if we focus first on next gen, which would be grades 5 and 8, LPS, we had 65% of our students meeting or exceeding, whereas at the state level it was 48%. Again, our scaled score was a positive 11-point difference. And if we go to the legacy for science, LPS, 92% were proficient or higher, whereas the state was at 74%. And the scaled score here looks different because it's actually the CPI, which is the Composite Performance Index. And so the difference there was of 7 points. And so now I invite up to begin with the school specifics. Sure.
Could we do maybe questions during this section instead of trying to
Right.
bundle them all up?
Because
Absolutely.
That, and since I made the interruption, if you don't mind if I
fire away.
go. If you could maybe go back to the mathematics achievement 2019 maths by grade state Littleton. That one?
Yes. Thank you.
There.
Yep.
What I find interesting, we don't get individual students, and that's not really the whole purpose of this, but I think it does kind of give a picture of the whole district here. And if you notice at the state level, and I hate always focusing on the negative, but I'm going to pick the negative side here. The orange and red piece there. You notice on the state, it's pretty flat across there, showing no grade by grade improvement through the program there. I find it interesting, particularly when we pick up from grade 5 through 10, we see a constant increase in improvement in the
net performance of our students there. I don't want to overinterpret, but I do notice an increase from grades 3 through 5, though, in that lower category, almost approaching the thing there. Is, I guess, or as district-wide, is there information that we should be responding to relative to those types of trends? And I think the same types of trends show up in the ELA on the previous chart there. So could you maybe comment on that just a little bit?
Sure. I think Principal Temple might be able to expand upon it, but I will say that based on this data, we are taking a step back and looking at what the actual curriculum is that we're delivering and how it's being delivered, and reassessing what that looks like. I think also right now, because, I mean, Next Gen, this is the 3rd year that it's in place, but I think it's still an adjustment. And so I think that we have to be careful with looking at trends. At least at this point, 3 years is when you can start to get comfortable starting to look at trends. But we also need to realize that the exam has changed slightly since they've actually input the new exam. And so I think that's the other factor of trying to figure out what is the state actually looking for on that test. And Cheryl and I had a nice conversation with a couple of teachers today that no matter what they're looking for, we want to make sure that we're teaching the standards, and we're teaching the standards well, right? So with math, we want to make sure that our students are learning what they need to learn to become proficient mathematicians now and in the future. And so I think that goes back to the idea of looking at what the curriculum is that we're offering and evaluating that. And so I think that will potentially help with the negative area that you're pointing at.
Thank you.
A couple of other comments. When we took a look at our curriculum, K through 5, we've noticed a trend in a couple of areas. And to not belabor a longer conversation, we really felt that we needed to bring back greater consistency as the curriculum or curriculi more, I can't say it tonight. Curriculate, there we go, I'll change it on you. Curriculate changes with differing standards. We find our teachers are relying more on secondary resources. And so what we're trying to do is find a better resource for ELA and math that we can more heavily rely on, because when you have teachers going out and finding differing resources, you end up with greater differences in what's being taught at each grade level. Within the grade level, we're fine, but vertical alignment, to me, looking at it the last 2 years, I'm not as happy as I was 4 years ago when I look at where we're at with a consistent curriculum before it changed. We also added a phonics program, Foundations, to Shaker Lane. We're offering it in kindergarten and grade 1 this year, and piloting in grade 2. So that in itself will help ELA quite a bit. We weren't using a phonics program, and I'm a firm believer in consistency in how we teach phonics. That's going to make a difference. This year, we're taking a look at writing. We're using numerous writing programs, and agreeing on a research-based writing program, I think will also move us forward in taking a look at some of those areas that we're still not where we need to be in. Math, everyday math is the same thing. They're pulling resources, excuse me, from Eureka Math. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's out of New York. And it's not a bad resource, but we have everyday math, and then some teachers are relying on Eureka Math more than everyday math. And we need to again develop greater consistency vertically. And I'm a firm believer that when we do that, we're going to see some changes in some of those results. But I also want you to remember that this is a very small snapshot of student progress in our district. As we continue to evolve and adopt different teaching methods for students and personalized education, there is so much that we aren't seeing from these pictures. This is a small amount. I don't want to exaggerate an analogy here, but it's almost like teaching our students how to take apart a Ford Mustang And then in the end, when they write a test, we're looking at a Model T. Now that's quite a spread, but what we're trying to do here is make sure that our students have the skill sets that they need to be successful as they continue their education, not just retain concepts. It's application, and it's very hard to have an exam like Mcats that's a traditional exam that's going to go beyond that. I mean, I think the next generation or the improvement in Mcats is significant and overdue, but there are many other things that it doesn't measure. And you know, I'm an advocate of adaptive exams. And at least with an adaptive exam, you know where your students are at in terms of their potential at that point in time. So there are flaws to any testing system, and I think in general, you know, I don't want to sound that I'm displeased, because I'm not, but there are some areas that we need to reflect on and make sure we develop greater consistency.
Any other questions or comments on the first part of the presentation? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on.
I can see him better up there. Just to add to that part of the discussion, as soon as the information comes out, the staff can't wait to get in there, and they go, there are pages and pages and pages of every individual student and every response to individual questions. So they can analyze all the way down to how many students in 3rd grade got question 1 wrong and what was their response. And they do that analysis right away. And so that happens in the fall. And so they're able to make adjustments in curriculum right away. So on my last slide, you'll see that that's really the discussion, so they can make sure, you know, this is where we kind of fell apart, or the students fell apart on last year's test, so we want to make sure we incorporate these things. So even though we're waiting last year's to this year's, that analysis happens. So I kind of struggled a little bit to figure out what information I wanted to share with you today, but I will say that when the staff got the scores at the very beginning, they were delighted that Russell Street was above the state numbers, and that had not happened consistently in the past, so they were really delighted, we all were, that the Russell Street numbers were above state average across the board. So in the slides we're looking at the percentages for exceeding, meeting, partially meeting, and not meeting, and also student growth percentile. There's no student growth percentiles, obviously, in grade 3, because it's the first time they take the test. So you can see, without me reading all the numbers, that we are above the state average across the board. In grade 3, exceeding was 15% for ELA, which is 5 percentage points higher than the state. Meeting was 54%, 9 percentage points higher than the state. And then for math, 10%, which was 1 percentage point higher than the state, and meeting 55%, 15 percentage points higher than the state. For grade 4, 2% higher with 11% exceeding, 53% exceeding, 10% higher than the state. For exceeding for math, 11%, 3% higher than the state, and meeting was 48%, 7 percentage points above the state. There, our student growth percentile was moderate in both cases, 58.5 and 44, both in ELA and math. And 5th grade, exceeding was 8%, 1% percentage point higher than the state. Meeting was 51%, 6 percentage points higher than the state. And that was a 55% student growth percentile. Then exceeding in math, 7%, 1% higher than the state, and 45% meeting, which was 2 percentage points higher. Student growth percentile, 58.9. They don't calculate the student growth percentile in science, but we were 10% exceeding and 48% meeting, which is above the state average, 2 percentage points and 8 percentage points. So we were pleased with those numbers. This slide, it was brought to my attention today, was a little bit confusing. Sorry about that. The exceeding and meeting versus the state, it's just grouping them together, and you can see the numbers at the top.
versus the state. When you put exceeding and meeting together, we were at 13% in ELA, third grade ELA, and 16% in third grade math, 12% in fourth grade ELA, and 10% in fourth grade math, 7% in fifth grade ELA, and 3% in math, and then 10% in science. What I was trying to highlight, and I wasn't specific in my 2018 to 2019, is looking at MCAS scores in 2018, spring of 2018, compared to MCAS scores in 2019. That's not a range of year. So we were above in ELA by 9% in grade 3, above in math in grade 3 by 4%, even in grade 4 ELA, 12% above in math. And even though it looks like our number dropped, and it did drop by 9% in grade 5, the median SGP for those students went from 43.5 to 55.1, which is a moderate increase in student growth percentile. And again, in math, the overall number in exceeding and meeting went down by 8%, but the overall student growth percentile from those students went from 49 to 58.9. And the student growth percentile is really what we're looking for, to see that students in the grade made improvement over time. This slide is something that I'm highlighting on the side without reading a bunch of numbers to you. Our students with disabilities and our high needs populations. And you can see the numbers for yourselves, how many students were at each grade level were in those subgroups, and how the students did exceeding, meeting, or partially meeting, or not meeting, and what the student growth percentiles were. Again, the 34.9 student growth percentile in grade 4 ELA is a low student growth percentile. The 36.8 is a low growth percentile, but the rest of the growth percentiles between 40 and 60 are moderate growth, and that's really what we're looking for in both our students with disabilities and our high needs population. Certainly this is an area that we need to focus on and be working on as we move forward. But we're pleased with the growth percentiles. As I alluded to at the beginning, when the teachers meet and have discussion about what are things that we need to continue to work on as we move forward, these are our next steps. So we want to continue the vertical team professional development on reading and writing. It's really important that third grade talks to fourth grade, talks to fifth grade, so everybody is in line vertically on what we need to work on and how students progress through the grades. We want to continue the answer key routine for extended writing in all grades. We want to continue the 45-minute win block. Win, as you know, is what I need. And we want to continue to use Dreambox, which is a computer program for students to practice math facts that can be accessed at school and at home. So we want to continue with all of those things. We really want to expand them. And in addition, we want to incorporate, so moving forward, we want to incorporate more writing opportunities in the reading block to address specific skills using Performance Coach, Practice Coach Plus, and Common Core Writing, as well as teacher-created writing prompts that tie to stories that they're reading in class. The writing curriculum committee that has been established through Beth is to research potential new programs and methodologies for teaching writing. Russell Street wants to make sure that we develop vocabulary in content areas. They notice that kids get mixed up when they don't understand the vocabulary word. They have difficulty answering the question. Direct teaching of the use of text features in content areas, so really how to use, how to work with specific content versus just reading a story. And also to incorporate more Mcats practice problems questions throughout the year, especially word problems, and very specifically to introduce fractions earlier in grade 4. That was an area where they saw kids consistently had difficulty on the grade 4 test was with the fractions, and also to continue specific work on fractions in grade 5. I have always stood up here and said that the incorporating of the MCAS practice problems I think is really important throughout the whole year. So when you get to MCAS, you can say honestly and with integrity to your students, this is nothing different than what we've been doing all year, when they have sufficient practice versus, MCAS is in 2 weeks and now we're gonna get ready for that. If they continue to just take practice questions offline and incorporate them on a regular basis, students don't panic when it comes time to take the test, and they've seen that type of question for 100+ days, and so that's really important. And MCAS does open questions for us to use in practice, so teachers really do incorporate them in their daily and weekly practice within their classrooms, and I think that's a really important thing for them to do, so kids just feel comfortable with the test, especially third graders. I think that's my last one. Any questions?
Questions or comments?
I had two. So, so let me just hit this one there. So I get the incorporation of the MCAS practice ones. Is that, is it to mainly introduce the style of questions they ask, or,
Yes.
and how is that style related to the way we typically teach content? Is it divergent there, or we have to do that because, again, not just from familiarity, but because there's a style or something in there that we need to help them with?
In general, there's more writing component, so it might be, adding more word problems for math versus just a regular calculation problem. It might be a word problem about area, show a picture, calculate the area, tell us how you got this, or how, what method you use to get this. So it's not just showing the multiplication to get the area, it's how you divided up the picture and to really explain it. So those are the things that I see happening in the classroom more often. That example I just gave was happening today in third grade. It was the exact same shape, but the students had to show different ways that they could figure it. They had to divide it out different ways to show the area. So that's, when they do that to practice, it helps them out in the spring. But it's just that it's not extremely different from what we do on a daily basis, but I think the being able to access the previous MCAS questions just really helps, because then they don't have to pick and choose what they're using from their other curriculum. They just take it right off the site.
Okay, thanks. And then if you flip back one more chart there, could you just maybe clarify for me or provide me the sort of the technical distinction between students with disabilities and high needs, just so
That's a good question, because we were just doing that yesterday. And we were having this discussion yesterday in our admin council meeting. So students with disabilities are students on IEPs. When I was looking, we were all having this discussion yesterday when we were looking on the tons and tons and tons of information that you can access. And one of the questions that we were dealing with was the students with high needs. And I was able to, click on a link and look, and I had this whole list of students. And I was having difficulty, as we all were, looking through saying, well, what makes this student a high needs student? And what I was able to figure out with students in a particular grade was the majority of students hit a high needs category because they had they had a low MCAS score the previous year. So it's not necessarily because of any other reason. We had a student who had.
He wants to know what it's a low socioeconomic status, it's reading.
Right, but.
Is that what the question?
Well, I'm trying to, so when I first
Mix
read
it
it,
up.
I wasn't
Yeah.
sure, is one a subset of the other? Are they totally distinct
They're two.
pools? And if they're distinct pools, I don't know the
Yeah.
criteria.
Students
Still
with,
within high
students
needs,
with disabilities is a separate category.
But they're
Okay.
also within it.
High needs contains student with disabilities.
Right.
Yes.
But it also includes several other things.
Right.
So if you want to separate just those kids.
Well,
who are
I
on-
was just trying to make sure I understood, so, again, without attribution, like the first two, the 18, are those 18 in that 29?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Like if they're ELL students, they would.
Okay.
That's what
Right.
It's a broader category.
that's what I mean, so.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
I see.
And just so you know, some students score in multiple categories, so the
Yep.
numbers may not add up. So a student
Yeah.
might be economically
Right.
disadvantaged, right, of a certain ethnicity and with a disability, so it shows up 3 times for one student, so the numbers don't always.
Yeah, no, yeah, right, and I wasn't gonna try to drill down to, I just wanted to make sure I understood, because I guess that helps me there, is students with disabilities, a subset of high needs
Right.
there,
Yes.
and they may show up in multiple categories, because they may be both in ELA and math, they may show up there, but I don't want to continue that analysis, because I don't want to try to say that, oh, there's 2 students that have a problem.
Right.
Type
That's
of,
what she counts.
yeah, I don't want to, I'm not intending that, I just want to make sure I understood the technical differences between the categories. Thank you.
Yeah, Beth and I and John, in September, went to a training on a new database that DESE provides. It's called EWIS, and it allows you to take into account various factors. It differs from grade span to grade span, and it helps us identify students who are struggling. So it's a good data bank. So we were training the rest of the
Yep.
staff on it this week. I just have a comment about the ELA writing exam. It still is a challenge for some of our students, and it would be a challenge for a number of adults, because you're writing within a confined space. So as you're typing your story or paragraph, part of it will disappear on you, and it's a flaw in the design of the exam. You can adjust or adapt to it, but most people like to scroll back and check their train of thought and the flow from paragraph to paragraph, and that really is a disadvantage to when our students typically write in class using Google Docs. They can see the whole document as they're writing. And it's something that, I'm disappointed that the state hasn't been able to address by somehow elongating the box as they're writing.
So you literally can't scroll back up?
You can, but it's awkward.
Awkward.
It's time consuming. Some kids would lose their train
But
of thought.
even if you can scroll back up, if it's a small window and you have to scroll constantly, that's not good.
Exactly.
Even if scrolling is easy, you should be able to see the majority of it. I'm assuming we're not writing 3-page.
No, but it's
like
just
a paragraph or 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, you should be able to see it. I agree.
The flow isn't
Yeah.
as easy for some kids.
And there was some difficulty with the math toolbox for a couple of years. The kids had to pick a tool off of a toolbox and drag it over to be able to use it, so rulers and things like that. And sometimes it was just difficult to use the tool versus on paper, you had the little ruler and you could use it, where on the computer you had to pick it up and drag it over, and that was a challenge that we had to practice that before the test. So those things will work themselves out, and I think the fact that all of our students do their map testing on Chromebooks helps them to become familiar with that format for testing as well.
This is non sequitur to your thing there, but I can tell at work people that are responding to my emails from these versus their computer, because if it's more than a couple of sentences, they don't pay attention to the whole email. Because not because it's short reading, because that's the only part that they sort of retain that they respond to, and versus the desktop where you get a much more global picture of what's being asked and requested in there. The dead giveaway is signed by iOS or whatever little footer that it does, so I know exactly which system they did it from.
All right, we're good with
Thank you.
Russell Street? All right, thank you.
I think one of the other, just to hit on the writing portion in that box, in particular to the middle school, is for sure, kids will write and write and write, or they think they're writing and writing and writing, but because they can't see how much they've written, where like in a Google Doc or Microsoft Word, you can see sort of just the volume. You don't get to see that on the test, so then they submit and they've only written a half a paragraph, but in their mind it comes off as something different. So that's something that we're working out. The middle school, I get fired up about this night because I love the data and I love getting into it, and I love to see how the state distributes the data and how they categorize it. So what I've done at the middle school, rather than try and compare, different grades to different years, I looked at cohorts specifically. If you look at just our growth percentiles as the middle school for this past year, you can see our student growth is right where it should be, right in the dead center of that moderate range. And for me, that's exactly where you want to be. We achieve too highly to have that kind of high growth that you think would look good. when MCAS first came out, I don't know if you remember the AYP, and districts were supposed to get to a certain point, as close to 100 as you could get. The problem is that if you were a high-performing district, if you were at 98, 99%, you couldn't possibly continue to achieve, so you might drop. So it looks like you've actually regressed, but you're still among the highest in the school, and so that's kind of where we are. We become a victim of our own success at some point in time. So for me, when we look at the scores in 6, 7, and 8, they're right where they should be. That moderate growth to show, we're not moving too fast, we're not moving too slow. It's not these wild swings in the testing. And so I think overall, I'm very pleased with where we are in each of those categories. One of the things that I did, as I said, I looked at cohorts. Rather than grading or comparing a 7th grade class of this year to a 7th grade class of the previous year, comparing them to themselves. How over time have they performed? And so if we look at areas of strength within our subgroups, the current 9th graders, last year's 8th graders, our students with disabilities and our economically disadvantaged students scored really, really well in 8th grade ELA, as well as in math. And I want to explain the scaled score part of it, because the state uses a 4-point scale for accountability. And what the scaled score does is it gives you sort of an idea of just how much you've improved. So if you were at a 2 in terms of your accountability, to move to a 3 according to the state's rubric, you need to see a 0.5 point rise in your average scaled score. Well, when you look at our scaled scores, you're seeing 2.3, 3.8, 7, almost 10. These are massive gains. And that tells me two things. One, either our teachers are crushing it, or the test is different, so we're seeing something that shouldn't really be popping up. We should be seeing scores of a +1, a +1.5. When you get into 10s, it makes me wonder a little bit about how the test changes over the course of the year. Our current 8th grade students, again, the economically disadvantaged really did well. Our high needs students really did well. And our ELA students as well. Performed really well. Our current 8th graders, there is one area, and again, this is the scaled score part of it. You see a decline of 5.1 and go, wow, we must have really tanked it. But when you're comparing them against themselves, you look at it over time, the progression is where we want it to be, just like we saw on the first slide with the moderate growth. Same with our current 7th graders. Our high need students in math and ELA, we saw a little bit of a regression in terms of that overall score, but compared to each other, I think there's one thing that we noticed in the data was that when you have one really strong year, the next year you're supposed to improve upon that. And that gets to be hard to do, especially if one year the students really perform well. Maintaining that level of excellence can be almost impossible, kind of like that AYP. So if you have a little dip, it shows a drop like a 4.7 or a -2, when actually you're ahead of where you would have been previous years, but it looks like in an individual year as if something has dropped. And so for us, we talk about where does the need come in? What are we doing differently at the middle school level? I went through, my wife will kill me because I spent pretty much an entire weekend with my head buried in Mcats data. But a teacher last year asked about time. She goes, I wish we could know how much time students spent on tests and then compare it to how they performed on the exam. Well, the state data stays in the system, so I went through a few weeks ago, and I went through all 360 kids, times 2 tests per subject area, times math and ELA, and created this chart. And what we found was that almost without question, the differentiating factor in those students that succeeded and those that didn't was time spent on the test. Students that spent under an hour on the test, almost in every case, scored below average. Those that spent an hour and a half above were proficient, meeting expectations or exceeding expectations. And so one of the things that we're going to really work on this year is how do we continue to build a culture of take a breath, relax, take your time, do your best, there's no rush, because for us, that seems to be the biggest marker of success, is how quickly students are going through it. We had students last year go through the test in under 20 minutes. They're either brilliant or they're just trying to get the test done, and those skew scores. So that's going to be our real focus for this year. Any questions?
Those questions?
Well, that's a really interesting point. So is that, what you're talking about, having the students take time, you're suggesting that they do that for all their work?
Well, that's where it's hard, right? Because in an average classroom, you don't always have an entire day for a student to take an exam, but yet we're changing the rules when it comes to MCAS.
Right.
That shift in philosophy can be difficult to try and coach a 6th or a 7th grader to say, normally we want to rush you, we've got a lot to get done by this time. Oh, by the way, you have the entire day if you want it, right? Please take it. And some kids just aren't, we just haven't wired them that way. So it's about preparing kids to say, all right, let's slow down. Let's take your breaks. Like, walk away from it if you need to. The computer system is nice. You can log out, you can go stretch, you can collect your head, you can come back to it. And it's learning to coach kids to do that now when we haven't had to do that before. See where we go. It's going to be a test in psychology, I think. And how do you get kids to change that mindset for 2 weeks a year? No? All right. Thank you.
Good evening. So the results for the high school from this past spring. I went the wrong way. So we broke it down very similarly to how Cheryl broke down the results from Russell Street, and you can see how our students performed on this test versus the state. For 10th grade, for ELA, again, this is the first time that they had taken the next gen test at the high school level. They took it in 8th grade, so they had a little bit of experience, but it was an entirely new test for the 10th graders this past year. So exceeding expectations, 17% of our 10th graders last year exceeded expectations, and 71% met expectations, which you can see there's cumulatively 27% above the state average. Same thing in math, we're looking at 19% exceeding, 67% meeting, again a 26% increase over the state average in terms of meeting and exceeding. Science, which as Beth alluded to, was still the legacy test. We performed very well, once again, with advanced at 58% and proficient at 38%, so a total of 96% of our students were advanced or proficient on the biology exam this past year. The SGP for English was in the moderate range, 45.1, excuse me, and the math SGP was in the high growth range of 63.9. So our students displayed a lot of growth in the math from 8th to 10th grade, and moderate growth in the English this past year. This table just shows the same numbers, just kind of broken down and easier to see. Again, our total of 88% exceeding and meeting expectations in ELA, and 86% in math, and again, that 96% in the science, advanced, and proficient. The one thing that, as Beth was showing the results earlier, looking at the achievement scores in the different categories, this past spring was a little bit of a moving target for the next gen. In fact, there's many examples at the state level in our school in which the score range is kind of a moving target, where the state is still kind of calibrating the rubric or the scoring categories, and so there are examples of students who are in, say, the partially meeting category, but passed without need for an EPP because of the uncertainty in the scoring. And that's what we expect, I guess, this coming spring with the biology exam as well, as they really roll that out in next gen for the first time. So some highlights, I've already mentioned a number of these, but 88% of our students were either exceeding or meeting expectations in ELA. So we had really high achievement. We had moderate growth in ELA. In math, we had high achievement and high growth, which is really a testament to the achievement level of our students. And again, 96% of students proficient and advanced in science on the legacy test. A couple other highlights, looking at the subgroup results, students with disabilities performed really well against the state average. In ELA, where 54% of our students with disabilities performed at either the exceeding or meeting expectation level versus 22% for the state. Similarly, 42% in math versus 19%. In the science, technology, engineering, advanced and proficient, 59%. Sorry, that doesn't make sense. Oh yeah, never mind. I confused myself with the students with disabilities. 59 versus 38%. That looked wrong to me for a second. And students with high needs, similarly, 53% meeting and exceeding in ELA versus 42%. In math, 43% versus 33%, and in science, 61% versus 52%. So in all of the subgroup results, we're looking at well above the state averages in terms of the student performance. And then looking at kind of the cohort results for our students, looking at how they did in 8th grade versus the 10th grade. Again, we're looking at moderate growth for ELA, and if you're looking at the colored chart there on the left, we're really looking to see the orange and red shrinking. Those are the not partially meeting and not meeting expectation categories. Bless you. And we want to see the blue and green areas increasing, obviously. And so looking at our student performance from grade 8 to grade 10, again, looking at when these students were in grade 8, they're 82% exceeding and meeting. In 10th grade, they're 87% exceeding and meeting. And so that is where we get that moderate growth from. Whereas, I'll go back to this one in a second. In math, in 8th grade, these students were 62% exceeding and meeting and 84% in grade 10. So that's where we see that higher growth percentile in terms of the mathematics. This graphic here just kind of shows the cohort growth from grade 3 through grade 10. And again, we're looking at the SGP here, and so we're looking to have high levels of growth, at least moderate levels of growth, and we see that consistently throughout. And as Jason was talking about very recently, it's, again, somewhat of a result of our success over time is that our students with lower levels of growth from 8 to 10 is partially a result of the fact that they did well on the 8th grade exam, and so it's harder to continue to have that level of growth as we get to the 10th grade. And so when you couple our results with our moderate growth, we're still showing steady improvement. And similarly in math, we see more growth, we see more of the darker greens than we see in the yellows, which is, again, just an indication of our higher levels of growth in mathematics. Some of our next steps, we are continuing, obviously, to implement and prepare our students for the next gen testing in English and math, and also we're seeing the next gen test this year in science and technology. So along with that, we're looking at adjusting some of our instructional strategies and assessment strategies, and most importantly, looking at the styles of questions that are being asked on the next gen. One of the big changes in the English test was that there's no more long comp, which is always a staple of the legacy test. It was the first full day, it was dedicated to writing a long composition. That no longer exists in the next gen testing, so students are being asked to write different types of responses in English, for example, and then in science, another example, we're looking at the field test from this past spring. Our students did the legacy test for 2 days and then did a field test for the next gen bio test this past spring as well. And in talking with the science teachers, they're looking at some of the, again, the styles of questions that they asked on the next gen testing was a lot more, I guess, manipulation of data, of information, a lot of dragging and dropping on the computer instead of just bubbling in the answers. And so as we prepare for the implementation of the next gen test in science and technology and continue looking at the English and math, it's going to be important to look at our assessment practices and start integrating more of those styles of questions into our day-to-day assessments in class. We're going to continue to have a proactive approach to look at students who kind of consistently performed in the needs improvement categories and the warning categories coming up from the middle school into the high school, and just try to intervene as early as possible with students in 9th grade and 10th grade and monitor the progress throughout their time as they approach really the Mcats testing window, obviously, but also all the way up through graduation. Question?
Could you put chart 33 up?
Yes.
Okay, so looking at this one and then going all the way back, it's listed as chart 30, but it's not chart 30. It's this grade 10 scaled score range, and it talks about passing high school,
sure.
And EPP, which I assume
yes.
is a form of a education plan.
Yes.
Can you map that to, what will be the impact of where's passing relative to that in our scores, and how many projected EPPs would we need to be creating as a result of that? I'm just trying to make sure I map the,
Yeah, absolutely. And
I should just go to your meetings and not have all my questions answered, apparently.
no, it's obviously an important question. And with the changeover to the new scaling score range, when we first looked at the numbers, it looked as if we would have a whole lot more EPPs. But because of the uncertainty at the state level, we're looking at students who ended up scoring in the partially meeting category, ended up with the adjustment based on the state uncertainty falling into the meeting expectations category. So what appeared to be like 10 to 12 kids that were in that partially meeting category ends up being, I think, 4 kids who were in that partially meeting for English, for example. I can look back at all the specifics, but it was.
Just add though, we weren't sure about a few kids. We knew just based on their trajectory and past performance. We were concerned about them passing the test, the changes and adjusting to the new style of computer-based testing. Just what we knew about the individual students. And we were like, we knew they were going to be on the line. They were going to be.
Sure.
Would they cross over to passing? And they, as Keith mentioned earlier, they scored in the partially meeting
expectation.
But they earned the competency determination. They
Well,
passed
yeah,
the test.
well, even then,
they
like,
qualified.
even more
They don't
important.
have to retake the MCATs.
Even more important than that, there was a couple of students, and I sat down with Beth one day, and we actually called the state, because on one report that you ran, a student may have been coded as not meeting expectations, which is the old failing category. But then on a separate report, they earned the competency determination, which is
Yeah, great news.
the graduation requirement. And so you wouldn't be able to earn the competency determination in the legacy test unless you were in needs improvement. If you were in the failing category, you had to retake. But with the uncertainty, I guess I keep using that word.
Yeah, the state created a
the
little
state
more wiggle room, I think.
And
Adjusted.
if I could jump in at this point
Yeah.
too, just to, because I think this is actually the hardest part to explain.
Yeah.
And this is,
I already
for
ask
very
hard
obvious
questions.
reasons, right? But in talking with other districts, curriculum directors and people who are presenting MCAS to other districts, this is like how do you get people to understand this part? Because this is like the really tricky part as to, wait, students are partially meeting and yet we're graduating them from high school. And so the state did a statistical linking. And so what they did was they took the legacy results and lined them directly up next to the next gen. And so if the line for needs improvement was here, they drew a line straight across for the next gen, which is how you're seeing students receive results of partially meeting, but yet being above or below that line. And that's why we kind of have this moving target, is because the competency determination is set for our students. And legally, the state has to declare, so our freshmen have to know their freshman year what their target is for graduation. And so it cannot be changed because a new next gen got put in their sophomore year. And so this is the tricky part of having to explain to people that, yes, your child actually was partially meeting, but they met the CD because they have to meet the CD.
But not all of them that are in that will go over the line.
Correct.
Depends on what your number is.
All could, some could, none might,
Exactly.
depending on the district.
Exactly.
And the children, the students that we're talking
Correct.
about.
And where that line falls.
Is this 1 year?
2 years.
2 years.
So class of 21 and 22.
So this is the last year that we have to
Upcoming.
debate this.
Well,
The upcoming test, we think.
Oh, the upcoming test, so it's
Yes.
one more. So
Yes.
next spring, next time we get this will be the last time we have to consider that ridiculousn's.
potentially.
Great
So this-
math.
yes,
It is, like,
Yeah.
what is
No.
the statistical validation for that? Is there any?
Exactly. It's frustrating, is what it is, because the CD is set for right now for 21-22 with what the old legacy.
Well, I
with what
get
it
that,
was.
I get that.
The CD conversation moving forward is starting. It's going to be a slow and arduous conversation from my conversations with people at DESE. And so what that means is that unless everyone comes to agreement at the table, we may be having this conversation into 2023. They're trying to wrap it up so that this is solidified, so we're not having this conversation. But I don't want to stand here and say, absolutely, after 2022, we're not going to have this conversation. It's confirmed, because it depends on at the state where the CD falls.
So, good. I understand that part. And then where I was originally starting also with this is it looks like the creation of these EPPs is sort of a new thing that's now happening.
I can add,
No,
which is-
no.
We've had that.
It just wasn't, oh, maybe I see, I did miss it a little bit
Yeah.
there. I was just trying to get a feel
Yeah.
for, are we expecting now an increase in EPPs because of the way they're doing this and the criteria for this also?
Looking at this, because the EPP in the legacy test was for a student who scored in the needs improvement.
Yeah.
And so now it's just who scores in partially meeting. And looking at the numbers of kids who required an EPP in this year's senior class versus this year's junior class, we're actually a little bit below for this year's junior class and the senior class.
But that's a great point, because if you look at the statewide data relative to the legacy test to the next generation, that's not true in most places. They have a lot more kids that are in that needs improvement category. So
Correct.
they're gonna struggle.
Right.
Because their EPP numbers are gonna go,
More than
relatively
half their
speaking, through the
district will
roof.
be on EPP.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it was no different when they introduced the legacy exam, when they did. I mean, they used the same test design. So it was designed so that that very thing would happen. But we're not trending that way.
Yep.
And we would expect not to trend that way. And please don't feel that there's a correlation between the legacy ranges and the next gen
No.
ranges. It doesn't mean that our students have to earn that many more points. It's just a different scale.
Yeah, no, my primary thing is just make sure I understand what's being presented to us
Yeah.
and you know, and if there's implications of that for it, so, thank you.
I have a comment, but does anybody else have any other comments? So, to extend this a little bit, and this is the thing that I always take away from the MCAS, and I'm glad that we're gonna have the NWEA map growth presentation immediately, literally immediately succeeding this, because it shows two different things. The MCAS is an extremely relative measurement. When we say exceeding expectations, we're talking about exceeding expectations on the MCAS, which is an extremely relative measure of what our students are truly capable of and what they're the level that they're achieving at. And we all need to keep that in mind. And it's true also when they're not meeting expectations, it's relative to the MCAS. When you look at the MAP assessments, that's a different thing. That becomes a more absolute representation because of the way the test is designed and administered. Now you're testing not altogether absolutely, because there is a limit to how far they're going to push the kids in terms of the assessment. But when you get that result, that's a more absolute representation of what both the individual student and the cohorts are achieving here in Littleton.
Right.
And I think that for me personally, that's a big distinction. That relative versus absolute concept is a huge distinction, and why the MCAS is something we have to do. But given our druthers in Littleton, we might very well choose to ignore it because we have a better assessment that we think represents and helps us determine how to drive ourselves forward than the MCAS ever would or ever will be. And it's not the MCAS's fault. It's not what it's designed to do, except every now and then the state starts to pretend that, yes, it is. Well, maybe when you're looking at the overall picture of the state, of the Commonwealth altogether, maybe. I'm not even sold on that, but definitely not when you're talking about a district like Littleton. And there are plenty of other districts that would have that same thing. So I'm off my soapbox for a moment.
Very well stated.
Thank you.
Well, I had just one,
Yeah,
if that's all right,
yes.
just on the map, one of the nice things about the map is because we offer it mid-year, it offers educators the opportunity to adjust their practice to help kids in the moment.
Absolutely.
Where with MCAS, they take the test in April, we're reviewing it now in December, on a test that's not gonna be the same that, when they take it again in 4 months. Like, you almost tie educators' hands behind their backs because you don't know what questions are going to be asked on it. But these map testing, that's real data that you can use to improve your practice and improve student performance in the moment. I think that's a much more valid indicator.
State and,
And like one more, I guess, data point we looked at is,
Oh, yeah.
it's not, I just have this on, it's not in the packet, it's just something I was looking at today. Because Beth mentioned earlier that it was much more difficult to score in the meeting or in exceeding expectations categories on the next gen test.
Yeah.
And so looking at our number of 17% of exceeding expectations is, far below what we have seen in the past on the legacy test. And so, looking at that number, kind of looked at the other data points for this current junior class, and their measurables in every other category are really off the charts. Average SAT scores, average PSAT scores, honor roll, GPA. This is a really special class in terms of their achievement levels in the, Mcats and other exams.
But even again, that exceeding expectation is a relative measure.
Of course.
It's not an absolute measure.
Yeah. Right.
You have to take that with a grain of salt.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's some macro level trends that we can pull from that, but it's not relevant, doesn't gauge individual student performance.
correct.
Yeah, and we should, and I prefer the map approach and the other pieces there for the individual students.
We have vocal, preliminary vocal results.
So I think this is actually interesting that we've had all this, right? How are you guys feeling? A little tired of MCAS? Like, are we feeling a little bit like, whew, we've had enough, right? And that's kind of how our students feel, and then they get to this part of MCAS. Before we jump into speaking about, as Dr. Schcmte mentioned, this is just the preliminary, but before we even get to there, Principal Everhart made a good point this evening. He kind of mentioned it just now, and it's important to note that next year, the DESE has already established a change in the upcoming test exam for the spring. And so even when we look at results next year, that's going to be a whole nother change because the test is drastically changing in the sense that they've already stated that they're taking away one of the essays. So we're going to be looking at basically a very, very different test and set of results. So it just, add that little bit of extra to the mixture, which might complicate things for a few years until we figure out, and DESE figures out exactly how we should go about this. So.
But we did actually meet the test designer at that conference we were at for vocal.
Yes.
We had an opportunity to ask some clarifying questions.
Yes, we did. So the vocal is views of climate and learning. And so this is the preliminary data, and this is the data that we have and all the data that we have with regards to vocal at this point in time. And so after students finish the MCAS in grades 5 and 8, it's after they finish the science MCAS, and then in grades 4 and 10, it's after they finish the math MCAS. They then have the vocal to complete. And so here you see the number of students who took MCAS and the number of students who participated in vocal. Again, this is voluntary that the students do it. And we have really high participation rates of students completing the vocal survey. And so when we look at what the survey says, it's a little funky. And again, we have to kind of wait until we get our full results to really understand entirely. But this is a nice preview as to what we will see coming. And so the top is the scale. It is broken down. And what's unique is that the scale is different for all 4 grades, grades 8 and 10 being the most similar, but different slightly. And so when we look at the results, we can see, and I just coded it, and so green, if a number is in green, it means that it's at the lower end of the scale, so it's what DESE is calling the bottom 15% of schools. If a number is in yellow, it's the middle, which is 70% of schools, so we're right in the average in the middle, or high average. And then any number in blue is the top 15% of schools, so it's the very top of the scale there. And so you can see those numbers in all of the numbers except for one area. We're exceeding the state, which is good and what we look for. 2 of our areas we're really exceeding within the top 15% of schools. And when we look at the district, we're pleased with what we're seeing. The 3 to 4 points is considered significant. So you can see that with regards at the district level, safety, climate, And the overall bullying climate, we are at that 3 to 4 point range, which is significant in comparison to the state. So that is positive. Again, this is the data that we have for vocal at this point in time. We'll be able to answer more, and have a more in-depth look at it for us when we get the full results, and we can go a little bit more nitty-gritty from our perspective of what we want to look into. Are there any vocal questions or comments?
Versus written questions and comments? No, I understand. Oh, no, I get it. All right, thank you.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Perfect. So then just a couple of places for if anyone would like to go for more information. There's a couple of links there. And that completes our Mcats presentation.
All right, Jason, should we take a break, walk away? Or should we just keep cramming this in and keep going?
It's a road to nowhere. It just goes on and on and on.
All right.
It really does.
Go. It's about the journey.
I keep telling myself that at 11:30 at night.
All about
I'm like, what am I
process.
doing? I can't sleep because I have numbers running through my head.
So speaking of numbers, we'll jump right into the map, if that's okay. Dr. Punchy gave us a little intro into this already. So our map growth assessments, so our presentation this evening is going to answer 5 major questions. What are the map growth assessments? What is the map growth testing experience within Littleton Public Schools? How are map growth assessments scored? What do the reports and data actually say? And we're going to look at some of the highlights from the 2018-19 map growth assessments. So, what are map growth assessments? Our number one question. They are assessments that measure what students know and informs us as to what they're ready to learn next. And they're able to do this by dynamically adjusting to the students' responses in order to create a personalized assessment that will then measure the performance accurately. And so map growth assessments are K-12 interim assessments, as was indicated by Chairman Fontanella just moments ago, is that they're interim, so they're done during the year. They give live results, live time updates for teachers to be able to see exactly where our students are. They're web-based and computer adaptive. They have multiple choice, drag and drop, and other types of questions. You can see it's very small, but the picture that is there, I did a grade 5 practice map growth assessment test last week, and I just screenshot one of the questions, and that was one of the questions where you had to measure the angle and the degrees, and so I had to drag the compass onto the screen, know exactly where it goes, and then measure, which again talks even just to the dexterity of students using computers, right? Which I think is good practice then for the Mcats, which is another good reason why we have these map growth assessments, because it's allowing students to use their skills on the computers of taking assessments on the computers, which we maybe weren't doing years ago. Additionally, map growth assessments are grade level independent, meaning that they are not specific, here's the grade 2 map growth assessment. It has that, but it allows for, if a student is performing above the grade 2 level, it'll ask questions to go above the grade 2 level to find out where that student is at. Or vice versa, if the student is not at the grade 2 level yet, it'll adapt to where that student is. And then also they are aligned to the state learning standards. So key features of the map growth assessments is that they will provide valid longitudinal data that's based on equal interval scale, which really demonstrates growth over time. And so we're going to talk about that scale in just a few minutes. But another key feature is that they provide real-time data on student mastery and achievement on standards-based content. They're able to identify instructional level for each student independent of enrolled grade level. Again, going back to the fact that if a student is underperforming or overperforming. And they also are able to link to instruction, learning targets, and interventions. And the graph that you see there really demonstrates the fact that we can see student growth over years. And so we have map growth assessments in grades 2 through 8. And so we realistically can pull up and see how that student has grown from grades 2 through 5 or 2 through 7, all the way 2 through 8, which is an interesting ability to be able to do. Our second major question. What is the map growth testing experience within Littleton Public Schools? As we mentioned, it's computer-based. There are audio instructions available for grade 2 assessment to support non-readers. Testing accommodations are provided when they are appropriate. Map growth assessments are technically an untimed assessment. However, the Northwest Evaluation Association states that the average time of completion is under 60 minutes. And so we do encourage students and inform them of that. And that ties directly to the next point, that students are not expected to get every question correct. And I think sometimes that takes a while because students think, I have to be able to get this question correct, so I need to spend more time on getting it correct, when that's not necessarily the case. If our students are getting every question correct, then we're not challenging them. We're not really seeing where they're at or where their potential could be. We just know, okay, they've reached this level, but in all reality, they could be much further and we just don't know it, right? And so we explain to the students that they're not expected to know every single thing on this assessment, and that's important to have that mindset going into it. So as we've mentioned, it's an adaptive assessment, and this really provides a challenging test for each student. It allows for that personalization of the assessment, and it also allows for each student to have the same opportunity to succeed and maintain a positive attitude toward testing. And this is interesting because it allows every student to experience what it's like to be high achieving, because the test needs to figure out where you're at. And so inevitably you're going to get some questions right to keep you raising up to reach where it starts to get hard for you. And then they're also going to experience what it's like to be struggling and what it's like to have to figure it out and for it to be hard. And it's okay for things to be hard. I think that's a lesson that we really need to make sure that our students know, that things are hard and that's okay, and they can do these hard things. And so that's what a nice feature of this testing experience. And the assessment is dynamically built based on the achievement level of the student to provide accurate and reliable information for every student because it can be so individualized. So when we're looking at the testing in Littleton, we assess 3 times a year, 1 time in the fall, 1 time in the winter, and then again in the spring. And for the reading components, you can see them listed there. There are 4 for map growth for grade 2 and 3 reading components on the map growth for grades 3 through 8. And then on the next slide, we have the math components for grades 2 through 5, and then the math components for grades 6 through 8, 4 for each of those sets of grades. Which brings us to our third major question of the MAP presentation: how are MAP growth assessments scored? So MAP growth assessments measure student achievement and growth using the RIT scale, which stands for the RASH unit. The RIT scale is an equal interval scale, and so what that means is that I think the maybe best and easiest way to compare it is as though you're measuring a child at home against a wall. Right? A lot of times families will do this, is that they have the child stand against with a pencil or pen, they mark the wall. So you can see in grade 2 they were this height, right? The next year you put the same child against the same wall and you mark them and you can see they've grown that much. So the wall is not changing. The same stands for the RIT scale. And so the scale is not changing at all. You have one scale that's going to span all the grades. And so that's kind of the easiest way to compare the RIT scale with kind of our common knowledge. And so the scores from this scale will range from 100 to 300. So when we look at those scores, we then need to know, okay, well, if we're using the same scale for all grades 2 through 8, then what's typical? What's the norm, right? And so NWEA has set norms, and they plan on changing them every 3 to 5 years, based on the fact that these are the norms from 2015. It seems they're leaning more towards that 5-year until they change the norms. And so we're still using these norms that were set in 2015. And so if you look at this, when we see, and so I'm looking at the reading, the top left chart, grade level is 2. When our second graders start the year, we can anticipate those students achieving at a 174.7 on average with a standard deviation of 15.52. So in all reality, we're looking to see that our grade 2 students are starting in the range of about 159 to 190. And based on the research that NWEA has done over the years with hundreds of thousands of results from MAP tests, we know that majority, not all, but majority of students will fall within that range. And so that's kind of how they set these norms, and we can then identify student achievement in comparison to these norms. So our uses of MAP growth assessment and the data that comes with it, we can look at it twofold. One, we can look at the very individualized student class level, which it can be used for planning and individual instruction for students, meeting them at their individual needs, whether they're an at-risk student or an advanced student. Also, flexible student groupings within the classroom, and monitoring progress over time, even over the span of a year. As we said with Mcats, it makes it difficult because the students have already gone beyond. They're past your grade level when we're looking at that data. And so this is what's nice, is that with MAP, we're able to see that progress or those areas where students need improvement or they have strengths within the same year. And so that's helpful. From the school and district level, we're able to identify at-risk learners and then target interventions that would be appropriate. So at the elementary level, that would include RTI placement, or specifically with the WIN block. Also, it helps us with the Title I academic support at the elementary level, and then in the middle school, it helps with identifying who would benefit from the use of the math lab and the reading lab. Also at the school and district level, it helps inform student placement, identifying school level trends, and then monitoring school and district performance, as well as informing us of resource management and staff allocation. So bringing us to our fourth question of what does the data actually say? So looking at this, we will start with grade 2, our Shaker Lane students and their student growth summary. So this is, again, looking at last year's from fall of 2018 to spring of 2019. And we can see some really awesome observed growth in our second graders last year. And so when they started the year, they were falling within that norm. As we said, that norm for the grade 2 was 159 to 190, so they're falling within that norm, on the high end of the norm actually at the beginning of the school year, and then they're above the norm by the end of the year, and by a fair amount actually. The norm for the reading grade 2 is 188.7, and our students were averaging a mean of 203.4. And so it's nice to see that they've made so much growth and that they are above the norm. For our Russell Street students, grades 3 through 5, we see very similar growth and results within that. And so our students were beginning typically within the range, within the norm range, and then by the end of the year, the mean RIT score was above the norm for the end of the school year. We see very similar growth within the middle school results as well. Again, all of the spring 2019 mean RIT scores were above, if you go back and look at the chart, they were all above the norm for the end of grade level at each of those levels. Which then brings us to, well, what are the highlights of 2018-2019 MAP growth assessments? And there are several. So for this one to point out here, as we pointed out, our RIT score is above the norm for all of our grades 2 through 5. We are also able to, MAP growth is really nice in the sense that we are able to just pull a lot of a variety of reports. And so overall, we can pull, well, what were the grade level successes for all of the students and areas of improvement as well. And what I think is most interesting about this is that last year, so looking at the grade 5 level of successes and areas of improvement. So this last year we were able to say that the vocabulary acquisition and use was a grade level success. The year before that, that was actually an area of improvement. And so it's great that and I think that goes to show that the teachers are looking at this and realizing, as a grade, this is an area for improvement for us. And so it's just going to show that yes, it was a different cohort, that also matters, but they were able to flip that into being a success. So also pinpoints the fact that teachers are looking at these results and how they can improve their practice. With regards to elementary math, we see similar updates in the sense that all of the grade levels were above the norms within elementary math. Again, same with middle school reading. We see that all of the norms were above the 2015 established norms. And again, for middle school math, we see the same. So what's nice about this is that it's definitely showing areas of strength and areas where we do need growth and improvement. And our teachers are looking at this and they're able to look at it immediately. As soon as the testing session is done, the teacher can pull up the report for their class as well as for individual students to see where there are areas for growth and where their students are already hitting the mark. And so a big bonus of MAP growth versus Mcats is that our teachers are able to do that for their students 3 times in a year, whereas for Mcats, they're not even able to do that within the same year. For more information on NWEA or the MAP growth exam specifically, there is the link there. Any questions?
Yeah. Let me figure out where I want to get a line.
I'll ask one.
Go ahead.
Second grade, the 103 students at above normal grade level out of 114 in elementary reading, that's 90%. And then in math, 91% were at or above the mean level. For all the other grades, the percentages are in the high 70s, high 60s to low 80s. Is the second grade just really smart, or is that like?
So they showed amazing growth. I do think that I'm happy to hand off to what Mrs. Kane has to input for that. But I will say that it is the first time that our second graders are sitting down to do an assessment like this. And as odd as it may seem, it's kind of exciting. And they're it is, and they're to sit down and be able to take this on a Chromebook. And so the level of dedication potentially could be a little bit higher there.
Okay.
Michelle, do you want to add in something?
I would agree, but I would also note that in second grade, the level of questioning is very simplistic, and it increases as the grade levels go on. I've only seen up to 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. I haven't seen middle school and high school, but I would just keep that in mind, that the questions are simple in nature, they're very direct, and they get more complex, inferential as the students go on.
Well, that's kind of what I would have thought,
Yeah.
right? Because I wouldn't expect that one grade is really that much smarter in Littleton than another grade. I mean, unless, it just happens, but that's kind of what I thought, so.
And
they'll trend back towards the norm,
Yeah.
the mean,
Yeah,
as we go on.
exactly.
Okay.
And as the grades go up, the one question actually has like 4 within the one.
Yeah.
Whereas at the second grade level, it's not that way. One question is one question.
Oh, I got you.
But as soon as you hit above second grade, so 3rd and up,
Okay.
you're starting to look at one question. Actually, the kids have to answer part A, B, and C.
Right.
And some are pretty extensive, actually.
Okay.
And so that adds to that.
Well, and I was noticing the same thing, and I was wondering if, not to be cynical, but like the fact that, well,
That's my job.
I know. I feel like, and I don't know if this is something you can draw, a conclusion you can draw in the first place anyway, but like sometimes when you have second graders, there's like a vast difference in their knowledge, and as they go through the years, they're kind of leveled out a little bit in terms of, just as a result of the way public schools are.
Yeah.
Does that seem to be like?
It could be. I think you bring an interesting point in the sense that their background knowledge would be different depending on, a whole variety of things. And so
I'm trying to look at the positive side, is maybe that as they're younger, there's more variation as opposed to.
That
Yeah.
could be, that's somewhat of a valid point, depending on the cohort. We would naturally expect the gap to decrease with time.
Right.
That's one of our
Positive spin thinking.
key foundations.
Yeah.
You have to remember, grade 2 is the entry point as well, so I know it's adaptive, but at the same time, I think when you enter any adaptive exam, that beginning point most likely is not as rigorous at first. Beth pointed out, when you hit grade 3, 4, 5, then all of a sudden, before you can move to that next level, there are 3 or 4 different questions.
Right.
So that might be part of it as well.
So just a couple of things. So one of them, it triggered it when you gave your example on your sliding the protractor across the piece there. students with fine motor skills issues, which may not be on IEPs and things like that, how do we deal with, some of the difficulties individual students may have, or do we not have an issue with that during the testing?
Yeah, so accommodations are given to students so that they are able to take it in a way that is appropriate for them. Whether that might be sitting down one-on-one, if they're not able to actually move themselves, they direct someone else to move it for them, directions being read for them. And so the accommodations would be in place at the student level for them to be able to do that.
Independent of whether they're on an IEP or not?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
I
absolutely.
get it, I just want to understand.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a good
the
point.
piece there for it. And then the other part maybe gets more philosophical or not. What's the alignment of these tests versus against standard curriculum requirements versus the Mcats? Is there any alignment between the alignments?
Yeah.
Is
Yes,
that
there, go
That's a
ahead,
good-
there is.
Yeah, exactly. So there is alignment between the math growth and the Common Core standards, which is why, and that was a big move for the next gen MCAS, was to make sure that they're hitting those standards as well. And so that's, I think, the nice thing about the convergence, as confusing as all of this is, of the new, but being able to say that there is more alignment now with the standards for these assessments than there was previously.
Because I'm glad to hear that, because it triggers my next piece there is, I know I personally, and I get the sense that the committee as a whole is not always satisfied with this once a year MCAS being some kind of benchmark standard that we have to meet. I think, again, I really like the interactive nature of this, being able to actually direct and guide direct improvements in the classroom and to individualize to a student. Philosophically, should we maybe shift the emphasis of how we do this annual presentation? Maybe thinking about the MCAS one being more just short and concise and perfunctory there. There's some key observations that you've made relative to the district at a macro level, but shift the focus of the discussion to this and the data analysis, and maybe some suggestions on how we're doing the data presentation here, tables versus graphs, and the key points from it, because I think I get a sense that this is a much more valuable assessment for us. We can use it to benchmark that it's matching the expectations at the MCAS level, but rather than spending an hour of time on a test that you basically told us it doesn't help in the classroom, so should we spend that much time analyze in these meetings here relative to what are the key pieces that we walk away with it, but really what's the impact in the classroom? And this seems to have a thing here. And I'm just suggesting that as we think about our future presentations.
And one thing to think about is that when we first started getting the MCAS updates, one of the things that frustrated the school committee to a degree, and you guys did a great job of fixing, was we didn't track the cohorts over time, right? We compared third grade to third grade to third grade to third grade, and then we said, wait a minute, why don't we compare third grade to how are they doing when they get to fourth to fifth to sixth, and we went through that. And it would be interesting to, what we don't have here in the MAP assessment is that type of cohort tracking. I know you have it,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you guys are looking at it closely, but we haven't seen that. And I would like to do a deeper dive into that, because I think that would be interesting, and I think more worthwhile both to us and the district, so I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I think you have to be aware of and perhaps cautious of is the culture in the United States in general is norm to the type of one-shot MCAS test. And the example I can give is although we're a high-performing district, we were cited this year on a Hispanic Latino group, and it caused a small wave of questions. So I want to make sure that we're not making ourselves more vulnerable, because sooner or later something else may show up.
I'm not saying that we don't take the required emphasis off of the rigor of
Yeah,
things
you
that we're
guys.
supposed to do. It's relative to what we're discussing
Okay.
here
To
relative
us.
to the.
You guys are still gonna have to do what you always
have
do.
to.
Oh, no, that wasn't my point. Let me start again.
No. I guess what I'm saying is where would be the most valuable use of the time with the committee
Yeah.
here, and what is going to have the most impact relative to this. Because like I said, I think at one level you need to, there is some trend data off that Mcats that I think indicates some district level trends. But the deep dive, I think, is better reinforced by the map data here for it, right? So rather than, all I'm suggesting is rather than have 16 pages of presentation on differences in cohort things at the level there that is not really actionable for us, I'm not sure it's even actionable for you on it, that is that analysis time better spent on a slightly different presentation to us? And I'm just
Yeah, I agree
supporting
100.
that and suggesting it
I agree
moving
100%.
forward.
I think the point I was trying to make is
Yep.
beyond the school committee audience, this is something that we all have
Yes.
to be aware of. So we have to make sure that we give enough information.
Yes.
So when we're cited for something that we were, and we're able to take care of it, so we're not cited, that the general public has a kind of an
Yeah.
understanding of what this testing is all about. Because the public can lose sight very quickly.
Yep.
I mean, we've had the luxury of sitting around this table for many years and looking at data for many years, so as a group, we feel much comfortable looking at a data source that's going to be more meaningful to immediate changes in the classroom. But we also have that political
Right.
component of MCAS and what that brings in terms of comparisons.
Yeah. No, I guess my sense is this graph here is on the state website. That's the one parents will look at. There's a trend in there. We've got to have enough information to sufficiently address that trend. But I think what we're doing about it is better reflected in the map testing.
We can certainly do that. We can cut it down.
Just something to think about there.
Yeah,
in
I don't
terms
think
of-
you'll get an objection from our admin team. I think that's a.
Not at all.
I mean,
Some
I-
interesting insights that you
Yeah.
have, which are really what the focus should be, rather than calculating some
Exactly.
things that are not going to be actionable for anybody.
And I think the map test does a better job of addressing some of those. For example, we were just talking, one of my things right now is with time. The map test, it senses if you are clicking just to get through the test, and it will actually bump you off
Yeah.
and make you go back and redo it. So there's these little safeguards in the test that give you a truer sense of the student's ability, because it's not based on just
Yep.
something arbitrary.
And then I guess my final comment here is, so with the MCAS and the changes that they've introduced, both cohort tracking and the grade level pieces are starting to become almost meaningless to us here, because we can't get reliable
Right.
trend data and the other pieces there. But at the same time, since I don't want us to dismiss the fact that we do want to look at grade over grade, or grade to grade, whatever the right term, not the cohort, but the grade each year.
Right.
Because that does indicate a different level of trend there for it. So, I don't want to dismiss that part of it.
Right.
Because I think there is value in us being sensitive to that, even though I think probably how the individual tracks over time is important to that student. At the grade level, there should still be some normalized hits that we're hitting every year.
Yeah.
And it's
for it.
important to us to see that change throughout their educational career with us, too.
Yep.
It's important to see how our students are moving through the system, and you see a pronounced change in terms of where our students are by the time they take the high school MCAS exam.
And I guess just one thing in response to what you're saying too, I think we'd be on board with making that swap, because the map growth data does provide a little bit more valid, actionable data. But I don't want to discount the work that our teachers do with MCAS, and I know that you're not. I know that you're in support of that, and I understand that aspect. I think it's important to realize that, and you're totally right, that it's not actionable for the current year, right? So as a 6th grade teacher, they're looking at those results over the summer, or actually in the fall is when they're looking at those results. And so the teacher can make changes to their practice, but it's not going to impact the same kids that were sitting in the room. And that's what you're hitting upon. And I think we, as if I can speak for everyone,
Because
as
that
an
might
admin team,
provide
totally
some
agree
sort of
that-
macro level input to the
Exactly.
teacher,
Yeah.
and then that's more informed at a micro level by the specific test results in the classroom.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
you know, anyway, I'm just suggesting that because in terms of what's the best use of everybody's time, that gets us the most insight and useful
Just think
action.
about it, and I think we can, you know,
Sure.
we got 12 months.
Yeah, you might forget about it by then, and somebody might not be here to even say it
Exactly.
again. but-
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I'm sure you'll be
Thank you.
tuned in just to see what's going on, so.
All right.
No, we can do that, that's not, and I like that change. We're shifting a bit of the balance to an assessment that has immediate
And the one that
results.
you're telling us has the most value
Yes.
to you
Right.
as the educators.
Yep.
All right, good. All right, thank you. That is a lot of data, but as usual, it's terrific news. You know, we're really, any concerns we have in Littleton are frankly on the margins. And we're very fortunate to be in that position, and it's, you know, it's important that we pay attention to it and act on it as much as we can. But, you know, the overall picture that we get, as always, is high achieving, and it's a tribute to the students and the commitment that they're willing to make to the effort putting forth by the staff and all working together. So very appreciative, and it makes us understand that you guys are doing a good job, and the students are definitely benefiting from it, so thank you. All right, second spot in the meeting for input from interested citizens. Seeing none, we'll go into subcommittee reports, PMBC.
No update from last week. We haven't met since last week.
All right, budget subcommittee, all we're really doing is continuing to push data over to the town side. They've made, or they are making, I don't know how significant they are because I haven't seen them yet, but we have a new regime in place, and they're working on how they present the data. There's more detail, more supporting context. It'll be interesting to see the actual deliverable, which will be in February. But in order to get them towards that, Steve Mark has been doing quite a bit of work funneling information over to them and supporting information that goes along with it. So that continues to move. But other than the numbers that we've discussed at our previous couple of meetings, there's nothing to update on that. We'll go right from there to policy subcommittee.
Let's see, in policy, I think tonight we're only going to bring forward, both are in your packet, but we're only proposing for first reading tonight, updated IMG, animals in schools, which we've updated to include therapy dogs or therapy animals on it. We slightly reorganized we discussed it during our previous meeting, policy meeting, and we reorganized it a little bit in terms of it flows now from service animals, which are covered by state and federal regulation there, the new section on therapy animals, and then animals for supporting educational objectives at the end. So it tried to also help people flow through the policy. They're recognizing the first section is things that we have to do by law, and that there's limited flexibility in changing that. The other ones are district implemented policies there. And, you know, we would like to present that for first reading tonight, and I'd appreciate a motion to that effect. Or questions, obviously.
Yeah, I have a lot of feedback.
Right, well, let's do that first before we entertain a motion, because the motion
Yep.
could change based on input.
Yeah, so they're mostly changes, and I think changes you were trying to be consistent with. So throughout, if we're crossing off dogs and changing it to animals, there are a lot of places where just dogs are called out. Like, especially in the therapy animals section, but you'll find some throughout the rest, not the bullet point, but there are other places where specifically dogs are called out.
Yeah, for instance, right in the second paragraph, it says, for purposes of this policy,
Yep, right, exactly.
a service animal includes any dog that has been individually trained.
We didn't
Right,
even
so-
see that, did we?
Right, so,
Good
and
catch.
then further down in the therapy animals section, there's a lot of dogs.
We'll just
Yeah,
do a
so-
search of the word
Mhm.
dog and take care of it, yeah.
Yeah,
So Yeah, we can, in that second paragraph, we need to cross-reference that into the legal language, because the miniature horses has been allowed, but it's not service animals because it's restricted to dogs specifically there,
Right.
because of abuses in other
Okay.
interpretations that affected the ADA subgroup of people abusing that definition and undermining their rights
Sure.
because of
Okay.
differences there.
So-
So we'll double check the legal
Okay.
language on that paragraph.
Okay.
Justine, do you have any information on that?
That's correct.
That is correct? Okay, good.
Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is in the 4 bullets on page 1. The 4th bullet seems to be updated to talk about what the dog is doing as opposed to what's wrong with the individual. So then the first bullet point says assist individuals who are blind, so we could reword it like we did in the 4th bullet point. Minor point, but I think.
instead of one.
Yeah, so just like instead of assist mobility of impaired individuals, the way we made those changes, so that would be something good.
I think that change there was just to clarify so that it's using the person first language.
Yeah, so I'm saying we should do that to the first bullet point as well.
Individuals who are blind,
Well,
the individual is or the.
okay,
blind.
I was thinking, yeah, both ways we're talking about, in person first, but also we are talking about the animals rather than the dogs. I mean, rather than the individuals, so, because the other 3 points also follow that same pattern that I'm talking about, so the first
Oh,
one
we
does
just
stand
say
out a little bit.
Provide visual assistance.
Right.
We-
To individuals, it's not a huge thing. Paragraph 1 in page 2. I just keep going down my list, is that okay, guys?
Sure.
Oops. Paragraph 1 on page 2 starts to outline a whole bunch of specific things that they want in the plan, and people who are going to do it. I don't know if we need to be that specific in a policy. Like, pretty much from such plan could include the reassignment of the, like, those are, I don't think that kind of thing is necessary.
I'm not sure where you're.
Yeah, I'm not sure we are.
First paragraph of page 2, the partial paragraph.
Such plan could include the
Yeah,
reassign.
the first full sentence at the end of the very
The
first
person having
line.
custody, control of
Sorry?
So this language is out of the MASC recommendation, and I
Right.
think that's included in there to indicate that relative to issues in the classrooms
Yeah.
or other people there, the disability doesn't have priority on reassignment of the teacher. It's reassignment or reallocation of the piece
Right.
there. So it's the balance, and it recognizes the rights of the other parties
Yeah,
associated with this.
so that doesn't really have much to do with what I'm saying about this. What I'm saying is that this policy is starting to kind of dictate the actions of what the superintendent and principal would take. I don't think we need to tell the principal exactly how to solve the problem in the policy.
That's true, but the policy does have to support the school committee's point of view that while we're not dictating what you do, we expect, to Daryl's point, that the solution is driven to supporting the student, and or that the change is made relative to the student and not the staff. The actual execution of that point of view of the
Right.
school committees is certainly up to, and this is an example, and it specifically says, could include the reassignment, so it's a suggestion, it's not a determination, but I think it's important that the school committee establish our point of view that we expect, we don't, and to Daryl, and I think Daryl stated quite clearly, that we don't expect the teacher to get moved out of their classroom, because we want the teacher to the staff to understand that, you know, they're not gonna have to make an accommodation, that the administration will make the accommodation relative to the students.
But I feel like that's already explained in the first sentence which is the end of page 1.
I can add to that,
So-
because when I looked at this whole policy, service animals have federal and state protections. And so going into that paragraph just created greater clarity, because it's much more difficult to deal with any type of adjustment of an environment when you have two laws that are directing the integration of service animals into school district. So that consistency, from my point of view, is paramount to making sure that we're not deviating away from the expected actions outlined in the law. So that was my rationale for putting in there. I don't want Principal X to do something different than Principal Y, when we know we have a very limited amount of wiggle room when we're dealing with service animals in schools.
Right.
So that was the rationale.
And the other thing is that the first part of that paragraph, as I read it, seems to indicate that when a situation arises, the first part of the paragraph says that when a situation, the immediate reaction is to take the animal out and put him in a different part of the building while the administration figures out what do we want to do next. And then the next part about it is the one you're right. We wouldn't presume to tell the administration how to handle it, but we do want to make sure that the point of view has to be oriented towards, the solution will be relative to the student and not relative to the staff member. So I think it works. I think it's, and to Daryl's point too, if it's the standard MASC policy language, typically the changes we would make were to make it stronger, but not ignored from our perspective, unless we have a really good reason.
I mean, your point is well taken, Jen. We typically try to stay away from that. But
Yeah, that's true.
because
Right.
of ensuring that we still remain within the parameters of the law, we're just being a little more specific.
Okay. There are at least 2 instances where we have his/her. And I think, according to Merriam-Webster, we can now actually say their instead of specifying those 2 options. So check for a few of those. And then, yeah, definitely in the therapy animal section, the first paragraph has a lot referring to only dogs. I wasn't sure if that was intentional or not, because it's talking about examples of activities that students could do with the therapy dog, but we've only been talking about animals previously.
We'll clean that up. I mean, part of the subconscious thought at this point in
Yeah.
time is we
We're
only
talking
really
about
deal
dogs,
with
yeah.
dogs, but there are other service animals that can be brought into schools.
Yeah,
So
and I think that
we'll
was
clean
in the
that up. It was just a,
licensing
Yeah.
section and a few other places, so I think that's all I have. That's all.
thank you.
All right. Are you good, Daryl, to
Yep.
entertain a motion with the suggested changes?
Yeah, there's one.
All right.
Oh, see, you did change one of the
Yeah,
theirs.
but missed most of it.
Need a motion for the first reading?
I'll make a motion to accept for first reading policy IMG Animals in Schools as, and will incorporate the recommended changes.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any other discussion on that? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None.
And we're postponing KBE. We got feedback from legal today, and I haven't had a chance to review the feedback.
All right. Any other business? All right, hearing none, I'd like to say thank you for our back-to-back meetings, but now we get a break. We will not meet until 2020. Crazy to think, 20 years have gone by, a century. So we'd like to wish, thank you LCTV, and wish all our students, families, and staff a safe and happy holiday season. And we'll see you guys back in January. Thank you.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you.